The Week in Bible Prophecy, a Prophecy Watchers podcast.
Welcome to the program today, everyone. Mondo Gonzalez here with Josh Peck. Josh, here we are. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be back on the show. Good to talk with you again.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about, really, I think, a very fascinating topic, CERN. What we've seen is there is a lot of interest, probably most likely from our realm of, we like to talk about fringe topics, like conspiracy, of course, and that's good. And so there is a lot of interest in it, and I thought this would have been great, and you guys talked about it. We're like, let's do a thing on CERN. And so I think for in the beginning here, I just want to share a couple things with people that when we think about CERN, C-E-R-N, began in 1954. It's in Switzerland and France, right around on the border there, and it started a long time ago. This was an age, really the post-atomic age, right? And so after they, of course, we know that with World War II, but let's talk about that for a minute. That here, what were they seeking to develop here in 1952, 1954? And they started in 52 in the sense of developing this council. So let me just say, the word CERN is from the French. It's the basically, I'll give it in the English, but it's the Council of Europe for Research of Nuclear, CERN, and there's the whole French way to say it. But that was the original thing. That was a council. Then they changed it over, and that they kept the acronym. But it originally referred to the council, but now it primarily refers to the facility.
Right. Yeah, there's still a council. It's still CERN, and a lot of people, when they think CERN, they think the LHC, the Large Hadron Collider, which is the actual machine. So CERN is just basically the governing body that decides what to do with the machine, what experiments they're going to run, and it's not just the LHC. They have other machines there too, but that's obviously.
I saw they had 7 accelerators, 2 decelerators, a $1.5 billion budget. That Large Hadron Collider, 27 kilometers underground, 300 feet underground. There's thousands of people that work there.
Yeah.
So
all over the world.
Yeah, all over the world. There's 15, 20 different nations, mostly Europe, but they did allow Israel. Israel's participating in that. So let's think about. So they're getting. Let's get into the mind for a minute. They realized they split the atom. Okay, here we are, and they developed a weapon. And they decided we need to know more. This is kind of the beginning of the age, not just in theory, but of real quantum physics, right? Let's talk about that. In the sense of this isn't broad physics. This is at the quantum level. So let's throw that word out there. What exactly is that? Yeah. Let's talk about that and then what they were seeking to do here.
Sure. Well, the word quantum just means the smallest, most fundamental building block of reality, what everything else is made of. And so at one time it was believed atoms were like the basic building block. And then once we were able to actually look at atoms and see that atoms are made of stuff too. There's quarks, gluons, electrons, all these other things. So right now we think that something like a photon or a quark would be a fundamental particle, meaning it's not made of anything, which I know sounds strange. Which
we'll have
to get into how that works, because it has a lot to do with something called quantum field theory, which is a little different than what most people think of particle physics. But yeah, they were just discovering all this stuff, and I think because a lot of the classical physicists at the time, not all of them, but many of them were a little hesitant about the quantum stuff. It seemed too weird,
It is weird.
It is very weird.
Get into it, yeah.
And so I think on the on the nuclear or on the quantum side, I think it was just like, hey, all these other countries are doing these things. Let's pool our efforts. Let's put together a council so we can go through the data that we're finding together. And actually, that's what led to the creation of the internet, which a lot of people may not know.
I saw that, 1989, they created the internet.
It was originally developed as a way for scientists to share data with each other, to
collaboration.
And that's all it was. And then it turned into what it is today. But it's fascinating how that got started. So now today, it's on the surface, it's basically the same kind of idea. What they want to do is look at what is what is quantum reality? How do we understand that in a way that makes sense? What is the most basic, fundamental reality that there is? How can a particle exist if it's not made of anything? Questions like that. So, years later, quantum field theory got developed, and that is the only reason that the LHC at CERN even works, is because quantum field theory is absolutely correct. You were probably taught, as I was in school, that a particle is really just a tiny piece of matter. It's just like just a tiny piece of matter. That's how to think about it. It's like a little sphere, and they cycle around each other, and almost like the planets in the solar system. And we've all seen the charts and things that try to depict that. Well, what quantum field theory says is that's not exactly accurate. We kind of perceive it that way just because we're limited in our vision and our brains and everything, But that's how like a particle can be a wave and a particle at the same time. But really, what's happening is really more mind-bending. What a particle is, it's not a piece of matter at all. Actually, matter isn't matter at all, like the way we think of it. Like we think of matter as this solid stuff. It's really not. So when you break it down to its most fundamental, just basic building blocks, a particle is just a spike in energy. And what that means is, well, what is it spiking into? It's spiking into a quantum field. So all around us, everywhere, we don't know how many, but there's several fields that have the potential to I almost want to say bring a particle into existence, but that's not exactly right. It at any localized point, at any point in space, any certain field, if it gets some energy, or if it gets excited in one area, it'll spike. That spike is the particle. So when you look at it, if you were really to see a particle for what it is, it's an energy spike more than it's a physical piece of matter.
Tangible substance.
Yeah, and because every basic fundamental particle, I think the theory right now there's about 57 of them, but there could be more that we just don't know about. So for like a photon, as far as we know, a photon is not made of anything else, and it really can't be because there's the electromagnetic field. So when the electromagnetic field spikes in a certain location, that spike is the photon. So in this room, there's a bunch of spikes going on right now, but there's places out in space where it's almost none. So that field is like there's no energy going on, so there's no photons. Gravity is like this too. We haven't technically discovered gravitons, but we know they exist because there's a gravity field, and for every field, it must have an associated particle. This is actually in 2012. A lot of people know about the God particle. They probably heard that. There's a funny story behind why I got that name that I probably can't tell on a Christian program, but they didn't call it that for a lot of the reasons that people
wanted to believe.
Yeah, it wasn't that, but people can look it up on their own if they want. But basically the Higgs boson particle itself that was discovered at CERN in 2012 through the use of the LHC, that wasn't the big news. The big news is that the Higgs field is real. So if you find the particle, then you know the field is real. Well, what makes that interesting is it means that mass isn't just substance. It's not just more of stuff than something else. Like when we say like the Earth has more mass than the moon. Well, that doesn't mean, we always thought that meant it's because it has more stuff. It's more massive.
More dense or whatever.
Yeah. That's not exactly the case. It's that the Earth interacts with the Higgs field more, and that's what mass is. Mass is an interaction. It's not an abundance of substance, It's an interaction with a field, just like the electromagnetic field or gravity field. It's the interaction. So the only reason we have mass is because we interact with this field. The reason that photons have no mass, and the reason that they can travel as fast as they can, is because they don't interact with the Higgs field at all. No interaction. So that kind of helps explain, okay, a photon isn't made of anything, and it can travel at the speed of light without anything impeding it. How does it exist? Well, it's because the way that we've been taught particle physics in middle school and high school isn't complete. It's not right. It's because the photon is just a spike in a field, just like you can have an energy spike in anything else, and it doesn't interact with this Higgs field, and the Higgs field is what gives things mass, or the interaction with the Higgs field is what gives things mass. So it's able to exist without seeming to be made of anything. So really the true fundamental reality are these quantum fields. So this ties back to CERN because if quantum field theory were not right, the LHC at CERN wouldn't be able to work because it's not. A lot of people think that what's happening there. So the LHC is basically like a large ring, and they fire protons or whatever. They do different particles, but they'll fire like 2 protons together or a string of them. And
one direction,
in one direction, another one, and they get it as close as they can to the speed of light. It's not exactly the speed of light because protons still do interact with the Higgs field, so you can't get fully to the speed of light. But they can get pretty close. And then that collision, a lot of people think when 2 particles collide that they break apart and then we're looking at all the stuff that they're made of. That's not what's happening at all. So imagine, again, quantum field theory, you don't only have like one field in one spot, you have all fields in all spots. So right now there's the electromagnetic field and the gravity field, and they both exist at the same time in the same place, but they do different things. There's as many, and probably more than 57 of those.
Wow.
That we know of. So the idea is to discover a new one, well, you need to put energy into it. So before we knew the Higgs field existed, they had the theory about it, and they thought, okay, well, if we do this amount of energy at this time, it should put energy into the Higgs field if it's there and reverberate it in a way that will create this particle, and that spike is the particle. Mm-hmm. So really, it's more like ringing a bell. When these 2 particles collide, it shoots out energy to all the surrounding fields. And if we can get the energy just right and get everything just right, we might vibrate a field that we haven't discovered yet. And the evidence is that the particle or the spike in energy will be there. Well, that's what happened in 2012.
Okay.
They discovered, so that discovery of the Higgs boson, not only did it prove, they already knew quantum field theory was right because they've discovered a bunch of things at CERN before that, but not only did it solidify that and also masses and interaction, but they were able to actually show that the Higgs field exists. So the question is, what other fields might there be?
Yeah.
And as far as we know, that's the best way to find out. You smash 2 particles together, throw a bunch of energy into any field that might be there, and then measure it, and then see if you find something that we don't know about yet. That's how all new particles in our modern age are discovered. So that's it's obviously more complicated than that, but that's like the basics of just how the machine works, why it works, and just the quantum theory behind it. And they say too, quantum field theory is the most accurate and predictive science that we have today. It's been proven right literally millions of times, probably even more than that at this point with all the particle collisions. But again, it would not, if particles were just little tiny pieces of matter, if they weren't spikes in energy, which that has all sorts of implications in itself. But if that weren't the case, and if it was what we thought, that it's just little pieces of matter, the LHC wouldn't work at all. We would learn nothing by colliding 2 particles together.
So here we are with, to me, I think about the excitement of these discoveries, mm-hmm. and it also just reminds me of the humility that we should have in that God's universe, for most of human history, they've lived, they've died, they've worked, whatever. There's been, some research, certainly you go back to the Greeks and others in Egypt, and they knew a lot of things, but they did not have the equipment to do these sort of research efforts. And so we're learning that the building, the basics, even the basics of the foundations of the building blocks of how God's created his universe. And yet what do you think in the sense of what percentage do we have understanding of, a very solid understanding not only of the grand, area of physics, the macro level, but also the quantum level? What percentage of understanding do you think we have?
Very little. There's it's hard to say because you don't know what you don't know. So it's like, what do we compare it to? We obviously know a lot more today than we did 50 years ago, and our knowledge in that is increasing. Something else I want to say too, real quick, is a lot of people, they take this like binary approach to these issues. It's either all good or it's all bad. Yeah. And a lot of people, like, I'm not a CERN apologist or anything. There's things that we can talk about that's questionable, to say the least, But There are also Christians working there. I know some of them.
Of course, yeah.
And 99.9% of the people that work at CERN, I think, are just curious
They're
scientists.
yeah.
And they just want to know what stuff is made of. I think for most of them, it doesn't go any deeper than that. There are people that have said some very weird things, and it seems like that they want to use the LHC as some kind of tool to reach into other dimensions and talk to other entities that might exist there. I mean, even their science director had this quote that, first, it's been on their website for a while that they do want to, if they can use the LHC to do it, if not the LHC, then maybe the future circular collider that they want to build in a few years, or maybe China wants to build a really big one at some point too, and maybe that would have enough power to do it. I don't know if the LHC does or not, but it's definitely in their goals that they want to first prove that other dimensions exist, and then they want to learn how to probe into them and map them out. And then they've even talked about how they could make a communication system, how they could set up something to see if there's something else on the other side. And when I think of like alternate dimensions and stuff like that, I'm thinking like that's the spirit world. That's not like, I don't believe in like the multiple worlds theory, the many worlds theory, which is like for every choice you make, there's another version of us. I don't believe that at all. But I do believe that there's more to reality than just what we see in here. I believe there are higher dimensions.
So when they're doing this, let me just ask this question for the sake of clarity. They're not necessarily saying, oh, we want to get into the spiritual realm and talk to a demon.
No.
Or they're thinking that they're maybe talking to somebody that maybe through, I'm just throwing a word out here, maybe on the other side of the universe, through a wormhole or something like that, where they're able to cross that bridge? Or is that, I mean, versus dimensions a little bit, it's a little bit nebulous about what that really means.
So it's not as much as they're trying to see if there's like some other planet in the universe that has life. It's not that. So with dimensions, what they're talking about, there's two different ways of looking at it. There's many dimensions and many universes. So in the many worlds or many universes theory, it's basically like what I mentioned that many people have heard before. This is most sci-fi TV shows and movies. They'll take this interpretation if they deal with a multiverse. Mm-hmm. So I know like Marvel movies are really big into this.
Loki.
Right now.
Loki for sure. The new Loki series is very much like that.
So that idea of the multiverse is called many worlds. Basically, there's other variants of yourself that made different decisions and all that. I don't see any evidence for that. And actually, in quantum physics, you'd have to explain a lot, because you would have to have something that is generating these universes, so you'd have to explain how that worked. Have you heard of I'm sure you have the fine-tuning argument?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you would have that, and just for those who don't know, it just basically says that like our world, our reality is created so finely tuned that it must have been from an intelligent mind, because if the atomic weight of like one of these elements is off by a little bit, life can't exist. And there's like thousands of these, or millions probably. You would have to amplify that up to many degrees of magnitude to compensate for some type of universe creating engine type of thing that's making these new universes every time somebody makes a new choice. And they like to say that would be infinite. It wouldn't be infinite, but it would be a number much larger than anybody could ever fathom. I don't believe in that at all. I don't think quantum physics supports it. Again, I'm not as strong in on the math side of it, so I have to kind of listen to people that can understand that better than I can. So Stephen Meyer is a great example of somebody, and this is where I first heard this from his book.
God Principle?
Yeah, I think it was that. And I thought he did an excellent job explaining.
He's great. Yeah, he's phenomenal.
So that's many universes or many worlds. Higher dimensions is something different. This one I do believe in. So when they say higher dimensions, they're talking about, in our world, in our three-dimensional world, we have a line forward and backward. That would be one dimension. We're three-dimensional beings in space if we don't count time. So we have forward, backward, left and right, up and down. So those are the three dimensions of space that we can understand. And then we do have one of time. The idea of higher dimensions is, well, what if something of 4 dimensions, if a space of 4 dimensions existed somewhere, Well, we wouldn't know it because we wouldn't be able to see it. Even if we were right in it, you could see it to a certain extent, but you would still see it with a three-dimensional perception. So you wouldn't even necessarily know that you were in it. It'd be like if two-dimensional people existed, and this is a common example that's given. Let's say there's a two-dimensional universe just right in front of us, and it doesn't even have to be that big. And it's got inhabitants called flatlanders. Well, they don't know up or down. They only know left, right, forward, backward. They are physically impossible. It's physically impossible for them to move up or down. They can't understand up or down. To them, everything is like a flat line in their vision, and they have to go based on that. Well, even though if it were right here, they would be part of our three-dimensional world. They just wouldn't know it because they don't have one of those dimensions. They don't have the third one. Same with us. If our universe, our three-dimensional universe, was actually, and there is some evidence to support this, was actually part of a 4 or 5 or 6 spatial, or even higher, I think as many as 12, spatial dimensional reality, we would never know it. Now, if something from up there, if something from the higher dimensions came and interacted with us, we would certainly know that, just like if I put my finger in Flatland in front of a Flatlander, he would see my finger. He would only see a straight line cross-section of it, but he would see my finger. And I could move it around and do all sorts of weird things that he wouldn't know about. And it would probably look really weird to them. And then when I pulled my finger out, it'd be like, that line just disappeared.
Yeah,
it shrunk and disappeared.
Yep.
Isn't it funny how there's a lot of UFO reports where these three-dimensional balls will just shrink and disappear?
Yep.
And so it's so similar to what it would actually be like if a 4 or 5th dimensional being or structure or something were to breach our universe. Some of these UFO reports are and these aren't quantum physicists. They wouldn't know how to explain it like this. But they explain it in such a way where it's like, that I think that's some kind of 4-dimensional object. Don't know what it is, or don't know anything about that, but that's how it would be. That's how it would behave. So the idea of higher dimensions, I believe that that's true. I think it can even be biblically supported because maybe not as much the dimensional quantum physics aspect, but there are parts. Obviously, we know heaven and hell. We know that there's spiritual reality beyond our own, and I've kind of grown from thinking that was more like a ghostly, wispy kind of thing. I think it's actually super physical, like more real than what we're living now. And we're so limited, we just can't perceive that we're a part of this larger, multidimensional universe. So when CERN is saying that they want to probe these higher dimensions, basically I equate this to when people try to reach out or pray to false gods or the otherworldly entities that are clearly not physical. They're not of our universe, but they're there and they exist. And people petition those things in like witchcraft and sorcery and stuff like that. I think it's a similar thing on the spiritual side, the way that we Christians would interpret it. They're not looking at it like that. They're looking at it as if, okay, there is evidence that our universe is more than 3 spatial dimensions. We just can't perceive it. So how could we prove that? Well, in what we can perceive, we know that there's human beings and there's intelligent life. Maybe in the higher dimensions there are too. So maybe we can send a message and see if we can get one back.
Get a response.
And here's how they would do it. It's actually kind of clever. But so I think this would be one of the very next things that would occur if and when the graviton is ever discovered. So there's even though we haven't discovered the graviton yet, we know it exists because there's a gravitational field, and we can, by doing measurements on the gravitational field and learning everything we can about it, there are certain mathematical realities that would have to be true for the graviton to exist. So there's things that they know about the graviton that have to be true, but they haven't observed it yet. One of those things is that if higher dimensions exist, gravitons can leak into them. They can, by their own nature, just go between. And that might be why they're hard to detect, because they could be passing in and out of higher dimensions. But that also might be, and this is one of the biggest pieces of evidence, is that might be why gravity is so weak compared to the other 3 main forces of nature that we know about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And this was what Einstein was searching for, the theory of everything. So we have the strong and weak nuclear forces, electromagnetism, and then gravity. And the strong and weak nuclear forces and electromagnetism, they've been able to be understood mathematically, and they've been able to be, in a way that makes sense. And they're all roughly about equal strength. So it all makes sense. Gravity is so weak, though. For some reason, and it's a huge mystery, Einstein couldn't figure it out, and it might have been because he didn't really like the quantum stuff. But gravity is so weak compared to the other three forces, nobody knows why. And it's easy to demonstrate. If you put a paperclip on the table, the entire Earth is pulling down on that. Not really pulling down, but the entire Earth is warping gravity in such a way that that paperclip is staying to the table. But you can take a magnet off the refrigerator, and it easily overcomes the gravity of the entire world. Yep. That's how weak it is, and we typically don't think about it like that. But so it's like, why are the other three so comparable, but gravity isn't? Well, the idea is, if gravity can go through other dimensions, that's probably where the extra gravity is.
Like it's dispersed into these other dimensions. Yeah,
exactly. And that could help explain dark matter. It could possibly help explain dark energy. Dark matter is this idea that there's a lot of matter out in the universe, a lot of it, that we can't see, we can't measure, but we know it's there because it affects gravity. Basically, galaxies spin too fast to be able to be held together by their own gravity. They should all have flown apart by now.
Yeah, and they should be blurred out by now, too.
Yeah, but for some reason they're not. So they kind of just put this word, dark matter. We don't know what to call it.
Yeah, exactly.
And one of the leading theories is it's some kind of weakly interacting particle or something, and we just haven't discovered it yet. But I think one of the easier and it would explain everything, is that gravity is leaking into other dimensions because there's other structures there, there's other creation, there's other things there. The Earth actually exerts more of a gravitational pull than it should based on its mass. And I'm not taking this hyper literally, but we read in the Bible about other creational aspects that we might not be able to see. And yeah, I'm fully aware that like a lot of this is poetic and stuff, but pillars in the earth, there's all these things that hell is in the bowels of the earth. We know that at least in some way, even if it is just all poetic, but I don't think it all is, but in some way there seems to be structures in the earth that aren't purely physical. Like, I don't think if we drill down deep enough into the earth, we're going to find hell. I think it's going to be just the molten magma and, the core and all of that. But in a spiritual sense, or even in an extra dimensional sense, hell could absolutely be there and we would never see it. The Garden of Eden could be exactly where it always was, and it's just in a higher dimension now, and so we don't see it. Maybe that's what the sword was cutting, our connection with higher dimensions.
And we see this, it seems strange, and again, it's a hard thing with using spiritual or dimensions. It's sometimes you just throw the word spiritual on it, but we see this in 2 Kings 6, with Elisha and his servant, and he's like, did the Lord open his eyes for that he could see? Mm-hmm. And the veil was removed, and he was able to see these other entities, good and bad. There, but the chariots of fire, the angels, the host of heaven, if we'll say it that way, were there, and they were there, but they were veiled, and so that tells us too. I think too there's a passage which goes back. People talk about this in Ephesians 3:18. Paul is writing, and he says that so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may have strength to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth.
Yeah.
Four
dimensions.
Yeah, there. 4 aspects there. You're like, what in the world? Did you just get the wrong? Maybe.
And they're all spatial dimensions.
Yeah, they are all spatial.
They're not.
Yep, exactly. There's no time there. Breadth, length, height, and depth. So it's almost like you have, again, length and width, height, and then the depth. Is to me is like, well, what exactly? That's almost like what I see there is the 2 Kings 6.
Yep.
Let me not switch, but just segue a little bit because one of the things in our remaining time here, you just did a video recently, and we have it on our Prophecy Watchers YouTube channel, and of course you had it on your Daily Renegade channel.
Thank you for reposting that, by the way.
Yeah, on the occultic side of CERN.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the things, we just, we're spending time here, we've just spent time talking about the scientific side. There is an occultic side to it, and what I want to do in my own mind is always keep that balance where, again, we love conspiracy, but I don't believe every conspiracy, right? And so how do we I guess I'll say it this way too. How do we balance that out? Because what I've noticed is that people are extremely interested in these fringe topics. They're not. If it just says we're going to talk about the science of CERN, very few people would be interested.
Yeah.
But we start talking. We're going to talk about the occult side. Now everybody, you might have 50,000 views or something or more. And I think it's natural for people to be drawn to the mysterious or those things. But on the other hand, we want to present a balanced approach. For example, you talk about in your upcoming Branson message, portals. You're going to talk about portals. Even going back to the book that I think you co-wrote it with Tom Horn about Abaddon Ascending. What were you guys doing? That was many years ago, 7-8 years ago, I think. What were you guys doing there? And again, Tom had his perspective, and you obviously had a contribution. What was the goal of that particular book?
It was
because you guys talked about not so much all the theology there, because we don't have time for that, but as it relates to CERN.
Oh yeah. Well, we wanted to look at each of these because we had the same question. Like, okay, how can we tell if any of these claims about CERN that we see online is true? And we figured, well, the easiest way is just to take each one and analyze it and look into it, and then kind of use that with the broad picture of what CERN is and what it does and its history, because there is some weird history there too. We talked about, so far we've talked about mainly just the mainstream stuff, the mainstream history and the science. But for example, one of the things that Tom was really interested in, he wrote half of the book, I wrote the other half. And it was funny when we wrote the book, we weren't calling each other a whole lot or collaborating. Like he wrote his half the way he wanted, and I wrote mine the way I wanted, and I thought they came together really, really well. But he handled a lot more of the historical aspects of it. So when they were first actually building CERN, they had to stop digging. And by the way, what a weird place to pick for this large machine. I sort of get the underground thing because they don't want other particles coming in and affecting their results. The underground makes sense.
Some of the easier, or I would say less robust particles. I mean, you think about a neutrino can go through anything.
That's not going to mess with.
That'll go through. But some of the other particles, electromagnetic radiation, I can see where they put it underground to protect.
So I get that, but it's like if you're gonna build underground, I would think you would want to pick the easiest place you could, and they picked something that's it's in the border. It's literally in the middle of the border of two countries, France and Switzerland.
In the Alps.
Yeah, in the Alps of all places, and that's where you're gonna build this thing. But what's weird, and the reason that I question that is because they actually had to stop construction because they found a whole bunch of Roman ruins. It turns out the area that they picked, I don't know if they knew it or not. I have no idea. This could have just been some big coincidence. I don't know, but it's of note. It's interesting. But the area that they decided to build this on was, in ancient times, it was a Roman city or commune or something called Apolliacum. And they venerated Apollo there. And Tom found in his research that they actually believed that the bottomless pit was there. And it just seems a little... I don't have any evidence to say, okay, they
how
definitely...
intentional it was.
Yeah, I don't have any evidence for that, but it's just... It seems too coincidental. What are the chances? Because especially, that makes me think of Revelation 9. You got Apollo there, Apollyon, Abaddon. And you have these things coming out of the bottomless pit.
You have the abyss, the buso. I mean, you have these beings, these creatures, absolutely being released.
Exactly. And so, I've wondered, and I wrote about this in the book, I wonder if the catalyst of that is this communication system that they want to develop. And basically the way that it would work is if they can find, I mentioned this before, this is going to be the next thing if they ever discover gravitons. If they discover gravitons, look real closely at what they want to do with it. Because there have been plans for, I think, decades at this point, that if they can ever learn how to manipulate gravitons, it'd be really easy to send a message to a higher dimension to see if it exists, because you can alter the spin. And you have just a string of gravitons and then alter the spin. Have one up, one down, one down, one up. Have it like a Morse code.
Yep.
And you can, and they naturally go into other dimensions anyway. So you can send it into another dimension and have a receiver set up and just wait and see if you get a response. To me, that really sounds like praying to false gods. That's like sending a message to false gods. So what if, and this is a big what if, I don't know, but what if by Revelation 9 something like that is happening, and God says, "Hey, you know what? You want these things? You're so obsessed with talking to them. You got it.
Yep. Gates are open.
Yep, gates are open, and then the bottomless pit opens, and these things are let out." So I've speculated on that before, that could be a possible way that Revelation 9 could be fulfilled, just because of all these connections with, Apollo and the bottomless pit and all that. So they actually had to stop construction to get all the artifacts and everything out of there. So that's interesting. And yeah, again, I can't prove intent on that. There's other things too. Obviously, they were gifted a statue. I forget the guy's actual name, but it's basically an Indian statue of what's called the Nataraya dance of Shiva.
Shiva, yeah.
And basically, in Indian religion, mythology, whatever we want to call it. When I say Indian, I don't mean Native American, like actual Indian. Indian. But in their religion, mythology, whatever, this depicts the destruction and recreation of the universe. Mm-hmm. So you literally see Shiva in this what looks like a portal of fire, and that was gifted to CERN. And so without actually seeing or hearing the conversations, they proudly display this in the entrance of CERN.
Entrance, yeah.
But I wonder, is it only because it was gifted to them? Does that mean that because they accepted the gift that they believe that CERN, that they embrace the idea that CERN is going to...
Well, because let's put it together for a minute. You have people who made this gift, and they're thinking about in their mythology this god, little g, who is, again, as you said, is part of the creative forces.
Yeah.
Well, they're thinking, hey, that's kind of what you guys are doing from a scientific perspective. You're looking at these forces, right? Of going back to which I don't believe in the Big Bang, but at least in that paradigm, the Big Bang, all these forces, these particles had to be manufactured, created through whatever at the time. So they're thinking you're trying to rediscover the forces that brought us everything here. Well, that's Shiva that is in our paradigm, and so I could see where, from one perspective to another, they accepted it. It is the god of destruction, but also creation too, right? It's
like a recreation, because I guess Shiva's part of what's called the Trimurti, which is their trinity basically, and it gets recreated for Brahma or something like that. So it's a destruction and a recreation.
Yeah. So which is what I mean. So in that sense, like you said, they put it out there in honor and in gratitude. Thank you. As we know, most scientists are secular or atheistic.
Yeah, they're not going to think anything about this stuff. Yeah.
So you have the scientists, the thousands of scientists that are working there amongst all of it, and then as we said before, you have the CERN Council.
Yeah.
And the council. You never know what's going on in the council about what they're doing, what they're allowing. We can even bring up the parody that they had there.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a drama that was done there that was very occultic.
Yep.
And did they? Now let's just be honest, okay? Christians, for good reason, were very sensitive to understanding, because we know what's on the other side of the spiritual realm. So it's right for us to not dabble in Ouija boards and other things like that.
Correct.
On the other hand, if you're a secularist, it's easy to get Christians worked up.
Yeah.
Because all you got to do is hey, let's watch the Christians just run with this.
Yep.
And they can tempt us to they lay the crumbs out for us, and then we react.
And I wonder how often that happens too. And I don't even think it has to be this necessarily really deep nefarious. It's probably they just want CERN out there in the news so they can get more funding, and these articles are going to get more clicks for advertising. And I mean, money makes the world go round. I think that's probably if they're doing that, which why wouldn't they? It works. I mean, just like recently, this is one of those decisions that made me think. I wonder if it's this when they decided on one of the most recent eclipses that they were going to start the machine on
that
the
day.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's Are they trying to get us worked up? Because
They did.
Yeah, I know. I mean, the articles went everywhere. Like,
Yep.
people blew up about it. But when you really think about it scientifically, what damage is that going to cause? Like, why would it be? Why would the particles act any differently
No.
during an eclipse? Like, they wouldn't. And to me, it's like, I think that was just to get people worked up so CERN stays in the news.
Yep.
And
It's one of those things that's unprovable.
Yeah.
Because you could hear the arguments like, well, that's what they want you to believe, that they was just an accident, or they did it in order to do it, but they really did it for sinister reasons. Well, again, none of us have proof either way.
Exactly.
But regardless, I do know that Christians can get worked up really easy. Myself included.
Yep.
We can react.
Yeah.
And we're not beyond reacting emotionally or from a conspiracy mind.
Sure.
Because we know there's a master conspirator. But I think at the end of this is trying to create, to be balanced and not to run so fast.
Yeah, yeah.
When the evidence is, or to build so much on coincidences. I hear that God's not a God of coincidences. Well, there's no, I agree with that. But what he means from it, and what we think he means, is usually 99% of the time different.
Two different
but yet
things.
we imbue our meaning into what God must have allowed this, or it's not a coincidences, or whatever. So, anyways, I think as we look at CERN, CERN is amazing what it's doing scientifically. People probably might get mad at me for just simply saying that, but from a scientific perspective, they're trying to understand these things.
Yeah.
How occultic are they? Again, I'm not going to defend any of that because I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to say. You could have just like 10 people at the very top that are super occultic, and the vast majority of everybody else underneath has no clue. Like, you just don't know. And then every once in a while, some of these quotes will slip out. Like Sergio Bertolucci said that if they ever do probe these dimensions and open a portal, that unknown unknowns might come through.
Entities are saying yes.
Yeah, there's a weird quote. And then that was from their science director. So you never really know. And I think, you're right. You can't say it's really just all absolute 100% evil, or it's all absolute 100% good.
Yep.
Everything in life has some bit of both in there, almost everything. So I think by and large, the majority, they're looking at this as a scientific exercise. There could be people at the top that know that, and they're utilizing that. And they're trying to steer it in a certain way that they know they're not going to get any pushback from scientists, because they're not spiritual at all. They're not thinking anything. So it's perfectly possible. I've said before, it's perfectly possible that there could be some dark cabal behind the scenes running everything at CERN, but we don't have any proof of it. We wouldn't know. And the experiments, at least for right now, that they're doing,
It's real science.
it's real, actual science. Some of this stuff you can do in your own home. Like, it's not to that scale, but you could build a particle collider in your own home. You take 2 flashlights, put them together, and turn them on. That's a particle collider. It's not going to do anything because they're photons, but and there's other ways that you could build really simple particle colliders too. You can even buy them. But this idea that, well, it's dangerous because it's tearing holes in reality and it's creating these portals and stuff. The thing that I think people, it's really important to understand is what they're doing at CERN is no different than what's happening in our atmosphere every single day since the Earth came into existence.
Explain that for people.
Yeah, so we have cosmic rays coming in and hitting our atmosphere on Earth all the
Not just
time.
from the sun, but galactic cosmic rays from other parts of
Everywhere.
the galaxy and the universe itself. Absolutely.
And it's good that we have an atmosphere because it protects us from that. All those rays are really harmful. So what happens is you have probably billions or trillions of particle collisions all the time in the atmosphere as these things are constantly bombarding the Earth. And the particles that are there in the atmosphere, they're striking into them. It protects us. But if a particle collision is what creates a portal to a higher dimension, one more ain't gonna do anything. One more at CERN isn't gonna do anything, because we would have trillions of them in our atmosphere, and it would have always been like that since the beginning of time. So, to me, the portal thing. Now, could they? I mean, they do have plans that they want to build some more powerful colliders that maybe it could get to the energy point where something like that could happen. But it's all. It's just, we don't know. Like, it's all completely hypothetical. So they do want to build, they call it the Future Circular Collider, which will be more powerful than the LHC, we're probably a long way away from that. I don't know the exact year, but
Lots of money.
Yeah, lots of money, and which apparently they're having a hard time coming up with right now. too, which could be why all the news stories and I just found out that CERN was trending on X recently, but then when you look at the stories, it's like nothing. There really wasn't any reason for it. Like there was no big news. It's not like they discovered some new particle.
Yes.
There was nothing. So it makes me wonder, how often that they put those stories out there to
keep the attention.
Keep the attention. So then donors and stuff like that. So yeah, a good balance, and especially like with the portal thing. Could a portal open up? I mean, we know so little about this that literally, almost anything's possible. But just because it's possible and we know so little about it doesn't that I don't think that's enough to warrant having a solid belief that this is just purely evil and any particle collision is purely satanic. They're all portals to hell, and I don't see it. For one, by now there would be billions of them at CERN. I mean,
right.
they've done this so much. The whole thing would be, it would be hell on earth if that were the case. But yeah, again, the cosmic ray stuff, they haven't done anything, and I don't believe we even have the technology to do anything that surpasses what happens with cosmic rays in our atmosphere. So I think at least on the portal thing, we're okay.
Yeah. So, and this is, again, going back here, some final thoughts is, this is something you're going to discuss in your Branson presentation there, and you're going to discuss it certainly in more detail, and I think help people to think through this biblically, scientifically, but also with balance, I imagine.
Yes. And that's really important too, because there are people out there, I'm not going to name names, but there are people out there that totally exaggerate this stuff, and they do it under the veneer of Christianity and biblical.
They're looking for clicks. Most likely,
and some prominent names, and I don't name names on people. I don't do that. I figured let their work speak for themselves, and people have brains, they can figure it out. But it is really important to, I think, having a balance, and on anything, on any
we're
issue.
urging caution. Caution and wisdom.
Yeah, exactly.
Really, that's what we're saying here. That's ultimately what.
Yeah, we're not CERN apologists at all, but we're not
dismissing it either. As being that these sinister things certainly could be, but I always try to encourage people, like with the eclipse. I wrote a lot on the eclipse, and I wrote a big article after the eclipse because there was so much prognostication as it relates to this, and I was like, where do you see this in the Bible? The eclipses are never, not even a single time, used as a bad omen, a natural eclipse of any ways. In fact, Jeremiah 10 says that the pagans were doing that, and God told them, don't be like them.
Yeah.
And so anybody that was saying that were fear-mongering through the eclipse.
There was a lot of that.
Yeah, they were. God said, do not listen to the ones that are fear-mongering according to the eclipse. I'm like, these are the ones that these Christians are violating Scripture by doing that. And so that's all we're recommending is, we know there's a dark side, we know there's evil, we know there's other dimensions. Paul says it right there. There's 4 dimensions at least. Other aspects, 2 Kings 6. So this is true, but we're just encouraging, be cautious, don't be reactive, think it through, pray it through, don't be...
Yeah. Yeah.
But it would be good to be labeled as a good researcher.
Yeah, especially because you never know. You might have a chance to speak with one of these scientists, and if an atheistic scientist just has this view of Christians as, we can't do any science without them freaking out about it. They're not.
We're into demonology or something.
Yeah. Like if they have that perspective, especially if we're perpetrating that, then we are not doing any good for the kingdom there.
Yep.
That could be a soul lost because they just won't take us seriously, and it's our own fault.
It's our own fault.
Yeah, literal souls, literal eternities. It's more than just people's lives are at stake with this stuff, and we got to make sure we get the right information out there.
Josh, been great.
Yeah, and every time I love talking with you.
And everybody else, thank you for listening today. And again, join us in Branson live stream if you can't make it. ProphecyWatchers.com. Check it out. It's going to be a great time, and we will catch you all next time.